permitted to wear a veil during the Hajj, going around Kaaba, or to wear gloves. But women tended to have a khimar, which is a head covering. And this is why people say, oh, there's no headscarf in the Quran. They don't know Arabic, because the khumar in the Quran that's mentioned are the head coverings. And they were told to take their head coverings, which was jahali urf, and to cover the bosom. The jiyub, the jayb is a cut. Like your jayb in your pocket is a cut. So the jayb is the neckline of the woman's clothes. So the women were told to take the khumar, the khimar, and then to cover with it the bosom, because the Jahili women would cover their heads, but they would leave their cleavage open. And so Allah told them, no, cover the head and the cleavage, which is why a lot of the traditional way of wearing the headscarf was to use the khimar and to cover the front with it as well, and you'll still see that. But that's not, they don't have to do that. They can use other material to do that. That's the Quranic injunction was because that's the material that they had. So as long as they're covered, whether they do it with the khimar or with the whatever clothes they're wearing. So, and then you have the chadur, which is probably closer to what the early women wore. They had an outer garment that they would wear, and they could hold it with their, so they didn't have a face veil, but they could cover their faces when they wanted to, and they certainly did that. And there's plenty of evidence. But the hadith of at the Hajj, when the Prophet ﷺ was giving the farewell khutbah, is very clear, because he took the face of Al-Abbas' son, and he moved it away because he was staring at a woman, and he turned his face away from her. So he didn't tell the woman to cover her face. He told the man to lower his gaze. And so what he's saying is it's not permissible when there's a fitna, and also if looking for any long period of time will lead to a fitna. And again, when they say fitna, they're talking about ladha. So next one.
ميارة على كراهة النظر عورتي ذي الصبا وأطلق اقتصر والقسطلاني روى عن الغرر جوازه إن لم يميز ذو الصغر قال وفي سوءة من لا تشتهى ولا تميز اختلاف النبهاء. Sidi Mayyara considers it reprehensible to look upon the nakedness of any child of any age, but restricted this ruling to reprehensibility. Whereas Imam al-Qastalani transmitted on the authority of the scholars its permissibility, as long as the child does not discern such matters. He also mentioned the same ruling concerning the nakedness of someone who is not sexually desired and does not discriminate. Yet there is a difference among the attentive scholars.
So the ulama differ about children. Sidi Mayyari was a great scholar from Fez. He's a student of Ibn Ashur. And he basically said that, unless you have a reason to do it, you should not look at the awrah of a child. It doesn't matter what the age. And he considered that makruh. To do that. So a woman, obviously, she's changing diapers, or do whatever she's doing, then that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about looking at the awrah of a child for no reason there. That whereas some of them considered that if the child doesn't have tamyiz yet, if there's no tamyiz, and sinu tamyiz is 7. So it would be before Sinnu Tamyiz, because you have Bulugh and you have Tamyiz. Bulugh is when they reach puberty, and you have the signs. You should have dealt with that in fiqh, because there's different signs. In the Maliki, it's Hayl and seminal emission, change of the underarm smell, facial hair, pubic hair. These are the signs. Even they have a head, the actual size of the cranium. When it reaches a certain size, there's a string test that you can do, and If the cranium reaches a certain size, then the fuqaha said that it should be considered an adult. So they actually measured the cranium to do that, which you can do that now, and pediatricians will do that to see what the development of the child, where they're at. And then in the Maliki, there's a khilaf about 18 or 15. So Ibn Ashur uses 18, that if they reach 18 years of age, that they have to, they're considered adult, whether or not they've had any signs of adulthood. So that's bulugh. That's reaching fully formed until around 18 or 19. So we know that adolescents their decision-making processes are not the same. They'll take much greater risks than people that are out of adolescence. So these are things that the Sharia recognized at the outset of Islam, and modern neuroscience is only really starting to come to terms with. So that's the point. If it's a child that is not in the tamyiz and they're very small, so and then it's also fi sawati man la tushtaha. This is in normal, healthy circumstances. One of the signs of the end of time is that the Prophet ﷺ said that children would begin to be lusted after like adults. And so pedophilia is one of the signs of the latter days. And Sharia also gives a lot of, we have in our Sharia a lot of checks and balances to ensure that there are not breaches of sexual propriety. And certainly with children, a child should not be alone with children, with adults that are not mahram. Certainly not males. The rate of child molestation is much higher. There are some incidents of female molestation of children, but very often they're actually with men that are practicing these things. But there is a lot. And the Sharia does not, these rules are not like, oh, well, I'm not worried about him doing that. No, these rules are there for a reason. We have many incidences of these things in Quranic schools. And I personally know people that have had their children molested in Quranic schools. So these things happen, and for Muslims to pretend that this isn't a problem in our community is to enter into a state of denial. And so the Sharia is there to protect children. And so they should not be in any situations where the potential for molestation is there. Because these are traumatic events that children will often never recover from. And so it's very important to take these rules seriously in our communities. When you do have like a Quran teacher, and again, it's not about suspecting, or it's about following the Sharia. So they might be 100% upright and everybody trusts them. That's not the point. The point is the rules are there so that it's a blanket rule. I saw an interview years ago with Billy Graham, I think it was. And it was during a time when a lot of these evangelicals were falling by the wayside because of all these sexual improprieties. And Billy Graham, the reporter asked him why there'd never even been a hint of scandal around him. And he said, when I was a young seminarian, I made a promise to God that I would never be alone with a woman that I wasn't directly related to. And so there's an example of a Christian just practicing a Sharia ruling, because that's not in Christianity. That's our rule. But that's just him being intelligent. Because the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ijtanibu mawaqi'a at-tuham," avoid places of suspicion. When he was walking with Salama, one of his wives, radiyallahu anhunna, it was dark, and there were two of the Ansar saw him, and he said, I think it was Maymuna, إنها ميمونة أو كما قال. And one of them said, أنتهمك يا رسول الله? Would we ever suspect you, O Messenger of Allah? Because every woman is mahram to the Prophet ﷺ, but irrespective of that, he was teaching them. And he said, إن الشيطان اجتنبوا مواقع التهم فإن الشيطان يجري في ابن آدم مجاري الدم. Avoid places of suspicion, because shaitan flows in the veins of the children of Adam. So you shouldn't put yourself in a situation. And certainly with children, that's the case. It's to protect the children. So if there's other adults around, that's fine. But, a male should not be taking children that aren't mahram for him. And even when you have mahram, we know the problems that can happen in families with incest. But at a certain point, Sharia is not, it has to be reasonable. Those are the worst, most egregious breaches, because people can grapple with a stranger, even though a child can find that very difficult, but somebody who's entrusted with the care of the child, to break that is a very sinister thing to do. It's sinister either way. It's this is one of the worst things. So it's important to recognize that. So he says that this is a khilaf about it. تفضل.
القرطبي للنساء أن تنظر عورة من لم يبلغ 12 وأن يرى أبدانها وظاهره ولو كشفنا ما الإزار ساتره. Imam al-Qurtubi allows women to look upon the nakedness of anyone who has not reached the age of 12 lunar years. Moreover, those under 12 can see ladies' bodies, and the literal ruling implies this. And the literal ruling implies this means even if they revealed that which their undergarments veil.
So basically, Imam al-Qurtubi said it's permissible for the women to see the awrah of somebody who's not reached 12, because 12 is the beginning of murahaqa generally. And again, one of the things about these societies, for instance, where I was in West Africa, you saw 8, 9, 10, probably 11-year-olds that didn't have any clothes on at all just because they couldn't afford them. So some of these rules are just dealing with poverty and the fact that people can't afford clothes all the time. So there were times in Mauritania during the drought in the 1930s during the Great Depression where they made clothes from leaves and things like that for people to cover themselves with leaves, and from leather. They were actually wearing leather because there was no cloth. So we forget about that Sahaba, the women were told that they put the boys between the men and the women, because when the men went into sajda, their awrah would be exposed because they didn't have enough cloth to cover themselves, just out of poverty. And then there was the Sahabi that used to leave after the prayer immediately, and the Prophet, he knew he was a good man. He asked him, why do you always leave? Because that was something the munafiqun would do. They'd get up right after the prayer and leave. He said, why are you leaving? He said, my wife doesn't have enough clothes to cover herself, so I go home so that she can use my garment to pray in. So, we forget how poor a lot of these people were. And so, obviously with women, they're in the house with the children, and so it's permitting if they're not at the sin and murahaqa. And children, obviously, for those of you who have children that are moving into murahaqa, some of the women, you will note that they, at an early age, children generally do not like you to look at them, and there is a natural modesty, and it's not a sociological it's not related to a kind of cultural thing. It's a very normal thing of modesty. And I had somebody who I knew who was a professor actually in California, and he was from the hippie generation, and he told me that both he and his wife wouldn't wear clothes in the house, and it really bothered his children. Like they were disgusted by it at an early age. So children don't want to be around that. And if you look at Aboriginal peoples that have these Aboriginal societies where they don't wear a lot of clothes, they always cover the saw'ah. And this is the fitra saw'ah, which he's going to get to, but you will see that. They first Australopithecus or something, there's a little monkey, and then the next one, and then it's getting bigger and bigger, and then it's man. Well, in that picture, they always show at a certain point, he starts wearing a loincloth. And you're kind of like, okay, what happened there? Why is he suddenly wearing a loincloth? Because if he was just an animal, why did he suddenly become aware of his nakedness? Because you don't see any gorillas out in the jungle wearing loincloths as far as I know. Right? You don't see chimpanzees wearing loincloths, right? So what's going on? Like, why did humans at a certain point begin to cover? And you do not find naked peoples. Everybody covers the So'atain. Native Americans were very different because you had certain tribes that wore a lot of clothes. The Iroquois, for instance, or the Apache. And then you had other tribes, the Miwoks, for instance, that wore loincloths. So it just depends. Even in Aboriginal peoples, you're going to get different types. But if you go to Australia and the Aboriginal peoples, they cover their nakedness. They don't. And it's shameful not to do that. So that's... it's a very interesting aspect. So the children, they will become aware of their modesty, and they don't want you to look at them. They don't want you to go into the bathroom with them, and they'll want to have that. So as they get older, you have to really respect that. And in our culture, because I lived with Bedouin people, and the thing about Bedouin people, which is very interesting, is the shadow self does not have the same capacity to grow. Bedouin tend to be very much, they are what they appear to be, because they grow up without walls. So they don't hide. When we live in houses with walls, then the secret self begins to emerge. And so there's things that people do that they would be ashamed of normally. For other people to see. So children will begin to do things that they don't want you to know about, whatever it is. And their privacy becomes very important. And obviously personalities as well. When you get into temperament, the Saudawi is more private. And the phlegmatic is going to be more private than the choleric or the sanguine. So, next one.
وهل ترى من أجنبي ما يرى مرء من أخته فحسب أو ترى كما يراه رجل من آخر يرون منهم ركبا وسرورا. Also, a woman is allowed to see of a legal male stranger, a non-mahram, what is permitted for a man to see of his legal sister, and only this. Or, the other opinion of the scholars is that she is allowed to see of men the same as what a man is allowed to see of another man. In other words, they can see everything but what is between the navel and the knees of a man.
So this is getting into the ahkam al-awrah, and basically the awrah, you have two types of awrah, what's called mughallada and mukhaffafa. And you're going to have some differences in fiqh about this. So if you get into the Hanafi, the Maliki, the Shafi'i, the Hanbali, they're going to have different positions on this. So I would recommend that you look at your own school, whichever school you follow. But in the Maliki school, you have mughallada and mukhaffafa. And the mughallada is the saw'atayn for the male. So it's basically the frontal private parts and then the actual the anus itself. So it's not even the buttocks. And that's why you will find in Aboriginal peoples they would often not cover their buttocks, but they would wear something between the buttocks. And that would be that's the fitra sawa of the earliest people. And then the other position there is between the surra and the rukba in the Maliki. So it's just below the belly button and just above the rukba, and that would be in the prayer. So if anything of that is exposed, then you repeat your prayer. And obviously it's sunnah to cover the top and things like that. It's not, it would be makruh to pray like that, but the prayer would be valid. For the woman in the Maliki, it's just below the breast. So the breast is not considered from awrah mughallada, it's mukhaffafa. And that is obviously to enable her to breastfeed in situations where other women are around. And then for the mahram, you get into these khilafs about what the mahram can see or not see. In terms of the man, he's not supposed to look at an ajnabiyya other than her face and her hands. And then idamatun nadar is not something, he shouldn't be staring at her or looking at. So when they speak, it shouldn't be like and also the eye contact, intense eye contact is what people in love tend to do a lot of. So it's not good to do a lot of intense eye contact. Dilatory, pupil dilation is a sign that somebody has pleasure in what they're looking at. So the pupil will actually dilate to take in more, metaphorically. There's a lot of studies about that. I mean, that's how they study visual stimulation now. And in ads, when you get in, because a lot of ads are very sophisticated, they will do dilatory pupil studies on ads to see how people's pupils react to the ads. If they're, it's very manipulative, but this is the type of stuff that they're doing. So they know a lot about these things now. So he's basically saying that, that a woman there's an opinion that she can look at a man without a shirt on. And it's not considered awrah. So these are, again, khilaf issues, but a woman should lower her gaze. The man is not obliged by Sharia to cover his torso. So if he's out working and he takes his shirt off, I mean, this is not something that people of muru'ah would do. So, somebody who maintains his self-dignity. So it's considered undignified. In the same way, I mean, this is becoming urf now, so I'm not going to, but it would be considered completely undignified to walk around in t-shirts in any traditional culture. For somebody to walk around in a t-shirt would be loss of muru'ah. And Imam Shafi'i said, if I thought that my muru'ah, my dignity would be diminished by drinking water, I would give up water. So muru'ah was very important for these people, just the idea of dignity, of walking upright, not eating in public, not eating when you walk, ornamenting food, as opposed to just eating to eat. One of the Prophet ﷺ's grandfathers, Abdul Muttalib, when he was out in the desert, if there was nobody to eat with and he was really hungry, he would actually put a rock. He'd find a large rock and he would put it up and he would eat, and then he would throw a piece to the rock because he couldn't bring himself to eat alone. So he would just eat with the rock, just to have the human company instead of being like, because animals, there are certain animals that eat alone. Humans eat together and they eat in a way that removes that bestial aspect of the food. They don't gnaw at the food and eat from the trough. They bring the food up to themselves. They use utensils. The hand is a utensil, but they use the plates and all of the. This is all part of humanizing that bestial aspect. So anyway, go ahead. That's what he's talking about there.
ولا يرى منها سوى وجه وكف إن أمنت قيل ورجل وضعف وهل عليها الستر حين تختتي فتونه أو قصده للذة ثالثها حتم على الجمال وهو لغيرهن ذو جمال. A man is allowed to see only a woman's face and hands, and this is contingent upon being safe from some tribulation. The Hanafi scholars include the feet in what is permissible to see. And the question arises, is it an obligation for a woman to veil her face if she fears seducing someone, or if she knows that he is looking at her for sensual gratification? The third opinion states that this is absolutely necessary for stunning beauties and for other women. It is a beautiful quality to veil her face in any case.
So basically he's saying that you should not look at other than the face and the hands. In uminat, that's the condition. So the condition is if there's no fear of fitna. One of the things also I think you have to take into consideration is people are very different. There are very passionate people, and then there are people that aren't. Modern people are far less passionate than earlier peoples were, and the greatest testimony to that is the amount of poetry that early people produced, especially love poetry. The Arabs were very passionate people, and if they fell in love, it was very strong. And so that reality is in the world. It was much easier for Americans to marry, and it was much harder for Europeans to marry. And he said so that if two Americans fell in love, they could go and they would let them marry. Whereas in Europe, because of the class structure and other aspects of the society, it was very difficult to do that. And so people could fall in love, and their families would not let them marry. The Montagues and the Capulets, and Shakespeare writes a whole play about that problem. So that really struck me, because I realized that if you had families that only wanted to marry from other families, which is what you find in many Muslim countries, families marry from certain families. They don't like people to marry outside of their socioeconomic status. They don't like them to marry out of their tribal status. And so it actually really helped me to understand, it made much more sense why you would want a segregated society. Because of the possibility of people falling in love, and then that love being a love that could not be consummated by the standards of the society. So that could easily lead to illicit affairs. And so I think that's one of the things that they're talking about, of being free from this fitna. The danger of this could be real. And love, the Arabs actually have 10 stages of love. And the first one is just it's mule. It's where you start getting the inclination. And then the next one is alaqa, where you actually, some type of relationship develops. There's an alaqa, a connection. And it moves on until you get into very intense types of love, like the muhja, of love, where what they call, the Arabs call it the wulu', where the person becomes impassioned. And then you have the ghuram, where there's obsessively thinking about a person. Like ghuram is something you can't get rid of. And tayammum, where they become like a slave to the person. They'll do anything for the person. And so this is what they're talking about, the fear of this, getting into those stages of love where people can actually do things that they regret and things that are haram. So the Hanafis don't include the feet in that. So women don't have to cover their feet. If you see a woman's feet, assume she's a Hanafi and don't tell her to, sister, cover your feet, sister. She just said, brother, lower your eyes. You say, I was. That's how I saw your feet. And then he talks about, whether it's not, is it an obligation for her to cover her face or not? This is a big khilaf in the tradition, and you get opinions. If you go to certain places, it's just an assumption that they have to cover their face. So if you go to certain places in the eastern province of Arabia, it's very, very strong there. The urf is very strong for a woman to cover her face. Obviously, in Saudi Arabia today, that is the dominant position, and the ulama rigorously adhere to that, which is why you will find people get upset if people don't cover their face. It's become a lot more lax since I've become a Muslim, and because I've been going to Arabia since the early 80s, and it's changed drastically. It's a completely different culture, especially in the Hijaz. So globalization is having its effect. I personally think that the veil will probably die out almost, and it will be taken not as a cultural, like in Arabia, it's part of the culture. So it'll become a religious adaptation. People adopt it, women will adopt it for religious reasons, not for cultural reasons. And so I don't think it's going to go away permanently. I think there will always be people. The arguments for it are compelling. Both sides are strong, but it's not like you can't say it's a weak position or no. It's there. Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya is of the opinion, and I certainly concur with him about that in the West, the veiling is very problematic because it's so alien to the urf of Western society, and veiling tends to actually be a very negative thing. Like it's associated with bandits and criminals, but women did used to wear face veils, and widows wore veils in the West, so they did cover. They had veils, and I actually have a picture of my great-grandmother with a full face veil on for Easter services. So, and that was in the 1920s. I actually wanted to write an article. My grandmother wore a face veil, and she was Irish Catholic. Because people did used to wear face veils, and this idea of banning them is very weird, because they give tickets to women if they have a veil in France now. So if they're up skiing on the Alps, they can't cover their face or something. It's a very weird thing, taking away people's right to express a religious sentiment. So anyway, what he says is, is it an obligation? And he talks about these different opinions, and then says, that she must do it if she's really, really beautiful. And if she's less than that, then it's still a good thing to do. So that's his position. In Mauritania, the women actually don't wear face veils, but they do sometimes. They wear their milhafa in a way where they can cover their faces. So they don't have the tradition of a niqab, what's called a niqab. But in most Muslim countries, niqab was very common. It's just a fact. But again, the Sharia is the dominant position in the madhabs of the great scholars of the madhabs was that the face was not a veil. And Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya actually in the Sina'at al-Fatwa says that it was the dominant opinion of all four madhabs, that it was not considered an obligation to cover it. So, and then go ahead.
والشافعية لديهم لا ترى منهم ولا يرون منها جوهرا وجائز النظر غير سرة وركبة من حرة لمرأة وقيل مرأى المرء للقرائب وقيل مرآه من الأجانب. As for the Shafi'i scholars, they consider that she cannot look upon men and that men cannot look at any part of women. It is permissible for a woman to look upon all but what is between the navel and the kneecap of a free woman. And a weaker opinion states that they can only see of women what is permissible for a man to see of his immediate female relatives. And even weaker is the opinion that women can see the same as what a man can see of women who are his legal strangers.
So there's two positions in the Shafi'i madhab, but in their rajih, that tends to be the position that he's talking about. So you have what's called mashhur al-madhab, which is a dominant position. Most of the ulama say it means what the majority of scholars in that madhab have argued. And then you have what's called the rajih, and some equate the two, the rajih with the mashhur, and some say that the rajih is the one that qawiya daliluhu wa in qalla qailuhu. It's the one whose the dalil is stronger, even if the number of people saying it are less. So, for instance, in the Maliki madhab, the mashhur of the madhab is you leave your hands at your sides. Some of the scholars say the rajih of the madhab is that you do the qabd, and some of the great Malikis did consider that to be the rajih of the madhab. So these are the differences. So he's saying that in the Shafi'i madhab that she shouldn't see the men, and then they should ornaments either. And you'll find that like in Yemen, in the places where you have very strict orthodoxy, that's the type practice that you'll see. He says it's permissible to see other than the belly button and the knees from a hurra for another woman. So if she was a bondswoman, which is a pre-modern status that we don't really have anymore, but the bondswomen were permitted to only wear an izar, and they were encouraged to cover, but it wasn't an obligation for them.